Humans walked on the moon 55 years ago. 6 missions, 12 astronauts, a combined 838 pounds of lunar rock brought back to Earth. And yet, not a single country owns 1 square inch of it. Think about what that means. We planted a flag there in 1969. We drove a buggy across it. We bounced around on it and hit golf balls on it, and left equipment sitting there that is still on the surface right now. And legally, officially, none of that gave the United States, or anyone else, a single claim to the territory. That is not an accident. It is not an oversight. It is a deliberate legal architecture built by the world's superpowers during the most paranoid, high-stakes standoff in human history, and the rules they wrote back then are about to collide head-on with a 21st-century gold rush that nobody in 1967 could have imagined. Here is the story of who decided nobody gets to own the moon, why that decision made sense at the time, and why it might be the most consequential legal question of the next 20 years. The year is 1957. The Soviet Union just launched Sputnik. A metal ball the size of a beach umbrella is orbiting the Earth and beeping, and the United States is losing its mind. Within a decade, both superpowers are pointing rockets at the sky. Both are designing nuclear warheads that could theoretically be mounted on orbital platforms. The moon, 238,855 miles away, is suddenly not just a romantic fixture in the night sky. It is a potential military position. The fear was simple. Whoever claimed the moon first could claim it the way European powers once claimed continents. Plant a flag, build a fort, declare sovereignty, and if you could put a nuclear weapon on the lunar surface, you had a launch platform outside the reach of any treaty that governed Earth. Both the US and the USSR understood this nightmare scenario, and for once they agreed on something. Neither of them should be allowed to do it. The result was the Outer Space Treaty, signed on January 27, 1967. Just 9 days after 3 NASA astronauts died in the Apollo 1 fire, a reminder of exactly how desperate this race had become. The treaty was negotiated with remarkable speed for something so sweeping in scope. Today, 118 countries have ratified it. Every major spacefaring nation is on board. And the key sentence, the one that still governs everything, is in Article 2. It says, "Outer space, including the moon and other celestial bodies, is not subject to national appropriation by claim of sovereignty, by means of use or occupation, or by any other means." By any other means. That is the phrase that carries all the weight. You cannot claim the moon by landing on it. You cannot claim it by building a base there. You cannot claim it by simply being there first and refusing to leave. The drafters closed every door they could think of. Outer space, including the moon, belongs to everyone and no one. It is sometimes called the Province of All Mankind Clause. The treaty also banned nuclear weapons in space, forbade military installations on celestial bodies, and required nations to help each other's astronauts in distress. As a framework for preventing a militarized moon, it worked brilliantly. What it did not do was define what happens when the moon turns out to be worth trillions of dollars. Because here is the thing nobody fully reckoned with in 1967. The moon is not just a symbolic trophy. It is sitting on resources that could fundamentally reshape the global economy. If anyone ever figures out how to get to them. Start with water. In October 2009, NASA deliberately crashed a rocket stage into a permanently shadowed crater near the moon's south pole. The impact kicked up a debris plume. A trailing spacecraft flew through that plume and measured what was inside. The answer: water. Not just traces. The Lunar Crater Observation and Sensing Satellite, LCRRSE, detected 155 kilograms of water in that single plume. Follow-on analysis found concentrations of 5.6% water by mass in the excavated material. Broader radar surveys from multiple spacecraft now estimate more than 600 billion kilograms of water ice locked in the permanently shadowed craters at both poles. That is enough to fill at least 240,000 Olympic swimming pools. Why does water matter? On Earth, water is worth a few cents a gallon. In space, it is worth a fortune. Water can be split into hydrogen and oxygen. Rocket fuel. A lunar refueling depot stocked with water-derived propellant changes the economics of deep space exploration completely. Getting cargo to low Earth orbit costs roughly $1,500 per pound, even with today's most efficient rockets. Shipping water from Earth to deep space missions costs multiples of that. But if you can mine it on the moon and process it there, you have cut the most expensive link in the chain. Water on the moon is not just for drinking. It is the gas station for the entire solar system. And then there is helium-3. This one sounds like science fiction, but it is not. Helium-3 is a rare isotope, the kind that barely exists naturally on Earth because our atmosphere and magnetic field block the solar wind that carries it. The Moon has no atmosphere. For billions of years, the solar wind has been embedding helium-3 directly into the lunar regolith. Best estimates put the total amount at somewhere between 1 million and 5 million metric tons distributed across the Moon's surface. Why does that matter? Helium-3 is the theoretically ideal fuel for nuclear fusion, a reaction that produces enormous energy with almost no radioactive waste. Fusion reactors that run on helium-3 have not been commercially built yet. That is the honest caveat. But the race to build them is accelerating, and every serious fusion program wants access to that fuel. Current estimates put the value of helium-3 at up to $1 billion per metric ton. 1 million tons sitting on the surface of the Moon. You do the math. And it does not stop there. The Moon contains rare Earth elements: neodymium, dysprosium, europium, the same materials that go into electric motors, wind turbines, and smartphone screens. China currently controls roughly 85% of Earth's rare earth processing capacity. A country or company that develops rare earth extraction on the Moon would bypass that chokehold entirely. The Moon, it turns out, is not an empty rock. It is a warehouse. So here is the problem. The Outer Space Treaty says no country can own the Moon, but it says nothing, absolutely nothing, about whether you can own the stuff you dig out of it. That silence is not an accident, it is a gap. And different countries have driven completely different trucks through it. In November 2015, the United States Congress passed the Commercial Space Launch Competitiveness Act, also called the Space Act. President Obama signed it. The law explicitly grants U.S. citizens and companies the right to own, transport, use, and sell any space resources they extract. Asteroid minerals, lunar water, anything they dig up. The law was careful to hedge. It states explicitly, the United States does not assert sovereignty or sovereign or exclusive rights or jurisdiction over or the ownership of any celestial body. We are not claiming the Moon. We are just saying that if an American company mines it, the stuff they pull out belongs to them. Legal scholars immediately erupted. Critics, particularly Russia and several developing nations, argued that you cannot separate the resource from the territory. Digging in a place exclusively for profit is a form of occupation. The U.S. disagreed. Luxembourg passed a similar law in 2017. The UAE followed. A small but growing coalition of countries now operates on the premise that space mining is legal as long as you are not planting a national flag and declaring territory. Russia and China say that is a convenient fiction. And they have a point. If you mine a crater and exclude everyone else from it, what exactly is the functional difference between that and owning it? In 1979, the United Nations tried to resolve this. The Moon Agreement, formerly the agreement governing the activities of states on the Moon and other celestial bodies, was meant to build on the Outer Space Treaty and answer the resource question. It declared the Moon and its natural resources to be the common heritage of mankind. It called for an international regulatory regime to govern any future extraction. Profits would theoretically be shared globally. It was, in principle, a reasonable idea, and it failed completely. Not a single spacefaring nation has ratified it. The United States never signed. Russia never signed. China never signed. The treaty has 18 ratifications total, none from any country with the capability to actually reach the Moon. The commercial space industry in the U.S. lobbied hard against it, warning that the Common Heritage Framework would kill private investment. The Reagan administration shelved it. It has been collecting dust ever since. The result is a legal gap you could drive a rocket ship through. The Outer Space Treaty says no ownership. The Moon Agreement, which would have clarified that, was rejected. National laws say you can own what you mine. International consensus on what that means does not exist. And now 2 superpowers are heading toward the same stretch of lunar real estate. In October 2020, NASA and 7 other nations signed the Artemis Accords, a U.S.-led framework meant to set norms for lunar exploration. By April 2026, 63 countries had signed on, including most of Europe, Japan, Australia, Canada, the UAE, and dozens of others. The Accords endorse the principle that you can extract and use space resources without violating the Outer Space Treaty. They introduce the concept of safety zones, designated areas around operations where other actors agree not to interfere. Supporters say safety zones are not territorial claims. They are temporary operational buffers, like a construction zone on a highway. When the mission ends, the zone ends. Critics, including Russia and China, who refuse to sign, say that in practice, a nation that establishes a safety zone around the most resource-rich crater on the lunar South Pole has effectively claimed that crater. The difference between a safety zone and a territory is, in their view, a legal technicality dressed up in diplomatic language. Both Moscow and Beijing are building their own competing framework. The International Lunar Research Station, or ILRS, announced jointly in 2021, it is a Chinese and Russian plan for a permanent moon base at the South Pole, with construction of a basic station by 2035 and a full facility by 2045. Meanwhile, China's Chang'e program has been methodically building toward a crewed lunar landing. Chang'e 5 returned lunar samples in 2020. Chang'e 6 landed in the moon's far side South Pole, Aitken Basin in 2024 and brought back samples from a region never previously reached. Chang'e 7 is targeted for 2026 to survey the South Pole's resources. Chang'e 8 in 2028 will test on-site resource utilization, actually processing lunar materials on the surface. And a crewed Chinese landing is confirmed for no later than 2030. NASA's Artemis III mission, which will return humans to the moon for the first time since Apollo 17 in 1972, is targeting the lunar South Pole. China's next missions are targeting the same region. Here is the geographic problem. The moon's South Pole sounds enormous. It is not in terms of useful real estate. Permanently shadowed craters, where water ice exists, cover a relatively small area. Peaks of eternal light where solar panels work year-round are even rarer. The scientifically and strategically ideal landing spots near the South Pole, places like the rim of Shackleton Crater, can be counted on one hand. Both the US and China want the same spots. There is no mechanism, no traffic light, no air traffic control, no UN parking authority to adjudicate what happens when they show up at the same crater at the same time. A Georgia Tech research team published an analysis in 2025 warning that the absence of clear legal frameworks for the lunar South Pole creates conditions for escalation, not necessarily armed conflict, but a deterioration of norms, competing safety zone declarations, and the kind of low-level friction that poisons larger geopolitical relationships. Nobody planned for this. The people who wrote the Outer Space Treaty in 1967 were trying to prevent nuclear weapons in space. They were not modeling a scenario where private American companies and the Chinese National Space Administration would both want to mine the same permanently shadowed crater for water ice and helium-3. The honest answer to why no country has ever claimed the moon is because the rules written 58 years ago said they could not. And those rules held in part because for most of that time, the moon was too hard to reach, and its resources too speculative to fight over. That calculus is changing. Rocket costs are dropping. SpaceX's Starship, if it achieves its target launch costs, could reduce the price of sending cargo to the moon by an order of magnitude. Commercial lunar landers are operational. Private companies are already selling rides to the lunar surface. The moon is not a distant symbol anymore. It is the next location where serious economic and strategic interests are about to collide. The Outer Space Treaty is still there, but it was never designed to answer the questions that matter most right now. Who has the right to mine a crater? Who gets to define a safety zone? And how large can it be? What happens when two safety zones overlap? If a country builds a permanent base, how long does its safety zone last? Can you effectively block a rival's access to the only water source for 500 miles, simply by arriving first? These are not abstract legal questions. They are the questions that will define the next era of space exploration, and there are no clear answers. What we do know is this. Every nation that has looked at the moon seriously, from 1967 to right now, has decided that no one gets to own it outright. That consensus has held through the Cold War, through the space race, through decades of geopolitical upheaval. The question is whether it can hold through what is coming, a period when the moon stops being a destination for flags and footprints and starts being an address for resource extraction worth trillions of dollars. The flag that Neil Armstrong planted in 1969 is probably bleached white by now. Decades of unfiltered solar radiation will do that. It no longer looks like an American flag. It looks like every flag. And maybe that was always the point. So here is what I want to know from you. If a country could legally claim territory on the moon tomorrow, which country do you think would move first? And what would the world look like a decade after that? Drop your answer in the comments. I want to see what people actually think about this one. If this got you thinking, hit the like button and share it with someone who would find it mind-bending. This is exactly the kind of topic that most people never think about until it is already too late to shape. Make sure you are subscribed, because next time we are looking at what happens when the first permanent lunar base actually gets built. The engineering, the politics, and the one problem nobody talks about that could end the whole project before it starts.